Today's presentation is on environmental product declarations. It's presented by Heather Gatineau. Heather is Director of Strategic Development and Innovation at UL Environment, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Underwriters Laboratory. You see her screen coming up, and with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Heather.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure there are some of you on the call that might have heard some iterations of this presentation, so thanks for listening in again. And for those of you who are new, hopefully this will clear up some of the confusion in the marketplace about environmental product declarations. As Mark said, we're going to hold questions till the end. We only have an hour, so I want to make sure that we get through all the content. But feel free to ask questions at the end, and my contact information is also on the last slide, so you can feel free to reach out directly to me. With that, we'll jump right in. So I originally gave this presentation at the CSI Master Specification Retreat about a month ago, and it was pretty well received, so hopefully it will provide the same amount of information to you. First, we're going to go through a bit of an acronym overview. There's a lot of acronyms in this EPD space, and I want to make sure that we're all clear on what they mean. Next, we'll talk about some of the market forces driving demand for EPDs, and then get into a bit of a technical overview about what an environmental product declaration is and how it's created. Last but not least, we'll talk about how environmental product declarations align with other types of sustainability tools. So first and foremost, the EPD stands for Environmental Product Declaration. ISO, which I'm sure that you're all familiar with, is the International Organization for Standards. TCR, which forms the basis of the Environmental Product Declaration, is a product category rule. Next, we refer to something called LCA, which is Life Cycle Assessment. Again, LEED and USGBC, I'm sure you're all familiar with as well. And then Sustainable Product Certification, or SPC, is actually UL Environment's version of a Type 1 multi-attribute certification. So you'll hear me referring to these acronyms throughout the presentation. Before we dig into the technical details of what EPDs actually are, I do want to do a brief overview of where the Environmental Product Declaration itself was originated. So in the ISO 1420 series, which is designed to assist businesses with measuring and communicating efforts to minimize environmental impact, there are three types of labels that are called out. Labels, or I should say marketing guidelines for environmental claims. And this series really, like I said, is a guideline for understanding how to communicate not only multi-attribute types of certifications, but also individual manufacturer-based claims as well as EPDs. So there are three types of claims or environmental labels. The first is your Type 1, which is a multi-attribute label developed by a third party. These are your traditional seals of approval. Type 2 is normally a single attribute claim developed by the producer. And then the Type 3 is the Environmental Product Declaration. And this is an LCA-based communication tool for environmental performance data. Today, primarily, we're focusing on the Type 3, the Environmental Product Declaration. For those of you who are interested in learning more about this guideline, you can go online and download the ISO 14025 standard. You're going to see this referenced very heavily in the future in various green building rating systems, so it might not be a bad idea to go and check it out. But essentially, again, the environmental labels and declarations 14025 series really is the guideline that helps one present quantified environmental information about the life cycle of the product. So what are some of the market forces driving demand for environmental product declarations? First and foremost, we're really seeing an increase in desire for information behind labels and behind claims. And we're seeing this in both the consumer space as well as the business-to-business space. It's not just enough to say that you're a green company, you have sustainable practices. People are really starting to dig into the information behind what those claims mean. At the same time, we're seeing a confluence of eco-labels being developed. And not just in the building space, but also in the consumer space, there's a lot of environmental labels out there. I think the last time we checked, there were about 465 or 70. And people are starting to look for what information makes up those labels and what labels are credible. So I'm sure that you're hearing and reading all about the great eco-label shakeouts and seeing some eco-labels rise to the top. At the same time, we're seeing some macro trends in the broader market. Architects, designers, and institutional purchasers are starting to demand transparent life cycle information about product environmental impacts. We're seeing this through the 2030 challenge for products, as well as through individual specification requirements, or I don't want to say requirements, it's a pretty strong word, but desires is probably a better word, from specific architecture and design firms. In addition, green building rating systems throughout the world are starting to incorporate credit or give incentives for utilizing environmental product declarations. Government purchasing mandates are also starting to look at Scope 3 disclosure of life cycle impacts, which generally is referring to a carbon footprint of a product. And then again, in the consumer goods and electronics industries, they are also developing life cycle-based disclosure tools. I know today we're primarily focusing on the building industry, but I think it is important to kind of look outside the building industry and see what's happening across sectors. And last but not least, we're seeing this need to integrate life cycle-based sustainability information into design tools such as BIM, Building Information Modeling Systems, and other design tools. Last year, actually 2 years ago now, we conducted a study with an independent market research firm to really figure out what architects, designers, and specifiers were looking for when it came to specifying green or more sustainable products. We found that 90% wanted to see an actual scientific evaluation of a product, whether it was through a test or some sort of disclosure method. Roughly 90% also wanted tools to compare sustainability performance of products, and they wanted access to specific sustainability information performance requirements that were designed to achieve a certain certification. So the environmental product declaration really allows the end user to achieve all three of these desires. So let's get specific for a minute and talk about some of the demand drivers here in North America and abroad pertaining to the building industry. As many of you know, the USGBC launched Pilot Credit 43 in June, not January, sorry about that, encouraging the use of environmental product declarations. And that credit has actually since been revamped to reflect Pilot Credit 61, which is now the Material Optimization and Transparency Credit, which focuses solely on environmental product declarations. In addition, the draft version of LEED 2012 includes a transparency credit, which again has been renamed as Material Transparency and Optimization, rewarding up to 3 points for specifying products that have third-party certified EPDs. We're seeing similar inclusions around the world. BREEAM, which is a rating system that's similar to LEED, used in the UK, in New Zealand, Australia, other parts of the world, already is giving credit for products with EPDs. FDES, which is the French system, is also encouraging use of EPDs. And last but not least, we're seeing encouragement of disclosure of life cycle-based impacts, primarily through the use of environmental product declarations and major building projects in the United Arab Emirates, specifically in the Masdar City project. Again, just to broaden the scope from the building industry just for a minute, the Sustainability Consortium, which is a group, or I guess I should say an organization that is composed of manufacturers as well as universities, is also creating an EPD-like system. And then we're also starting to see regulations. So the country of France passed a law in 2007 called Grenelle, and they are starting to experiment with implementation of that regulation, which actually requires the disclosure of life cycle-based impacts for all consumer goods sold within the country of France. So now that we've gone through some of the business drivers for EPDs, let's actually talk about the technical requirements. This is just the general definition that we use to describe an environmental product declaration. It really is a third-party verified, internationally recognized, single comprehensive disclosure of a product's environmental impact throughout its life cycle. We just answered that question. So say hello to the EPD. This is one of the first EPDs we published at UL Environment, and this is specifically for a carpet tile. Now, as you can see, the front cover of the EPD is, it houses a product image as well as a description of the product itself. Every EPD that is produced by UL Environment will look the same. So this allows for a templated form of information delivery. We've also based our system off of others in the world so that there is the ability to reference EPDs from international systems as well.
Heather, could I ask one question? Would each of Interface's products have their own EPD? So in other words, or would it just, or is it general to modular carpet tile with this glass back backing?
For this specific product manufacturer, we worked with them to create EPDs for all of their products within their families. So it's not like every single SKU level, like down to the SKU level, has its own EPD, but the specific product families do.
Thank you.
You're breaking the rule about asking questions there. That's okay. So what's inside the EPD? What are the contents of this EPD? First of all, there's a product definition and information about the performance aspects of the product, information about the basic materials of origin, a description of the product's manufacturing process, indication of the product processing, so you can actually see a description of the processing model, information about in-use conditions not pertaining to the life cycle, and then there is a very detailed description and disclosure of life cycle assessment results, as well as the denotation that this document has been third-party certified, as you can see with the UL mark on the front. In addition, it includes other certification information. So really the goal of the Environmental Product Declaration is to be, like I said, a single reporting tool. So we need to have the ability to include information from multiple organizations and multiple certification bodies. So as I said, it does give you a description of a product and its specifications, in addition to material content. So some architecture and design firms are really concerned about material content at this point, and this will help disclose that as well. It also shows the percentage of primary energy, for example, that is used in the various stages of the life cycle. So this top graph here is demonstrating that the majority of the production, or the majority of primary energy usage is in the production stage. This is useful when looking at doing kind of full building analysis, as well as understanding what impacts are throughout a product's life cycle. In addition, there is disclosure of the total life cycle impact information. So as you can see in this slide, there's actually two life cycle impact methodologies that are utilized here. The first is Tracy and the second is CML. And those pertain to different geographies in the world. So for example, if an architect cares about global warming potential, they can go and they can actually see, okay, I understand that the global warming potential of this exact yarn weight is 11.55 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And again, this gives them enough information so that they can look at products and understand their total environmental impact based upon life cycle assessment. Example of pulling out the actual global warming potential equivalent. So who wants these documents? We are definitely seeing a high demand from manufacturers at the moment, not only here in North America, but globally. We're also starting to receive inquiries from those that are purchasing products and specifying products. At this point, people really are trying to understand what EPDs are and how they're used, in addition to understanding more about carbon footprints of products. Those questions are starting to broaden into other environmental impacts, but primarily right now we're getting questions about CO2 and about carbon footprint. We talked about the consumer space a little bit, and in that space, mainly retailers are starting to look at this type of information. And then last but not least, suppliers and contractors, since they are in that value chain. Let's talk for a minute about the utility of EPDs, because it's not just a reporting document. It also has a few other uses, and very important uses. First and foremost, it's a management tool for manufacturers. The idea behind this concept is that if you understand your environmental impacts and you can measure your environmental impacts, then you can figure out where you can make the best strategic decisions to reduce your overall environmental impact. So it's not just an external communication tool, it's an internal operations and management tool as well. Secondarily, it's definitely a communication tool. It's designed to be a communications tool so that manufacturers can communicate their overall life cycle impacts as well as other environmental or sustainability attributes about their product to their target audiences. Next, it is an evaluation and assessment tool for professionals and procurement officers so that they can use this data for decision-making and benchmarking of environmental information. That flows into the need for it to be a procurement tool as well. And then last but not least, it's an action tool. Again, if you know more about the products that you are purchasing or specifying, or the products that you're producing, and you have that data, it really gives you the ability to dig into your supply chain and dig into your overall impact footprint and reduce that in areas that make the most sense for your business and the most sense for your firm. This slide lays out the general characteristics of an environmental product declaration. Now, I'm not going to read this whole slide here, but I do want to focus on one specifically, the comparability. This is extremely important. EPDs are based upon something called product category rules. This is the acronym that we talked about previously, the PCRs. And these PCRs essentially are guidelines or a recipe for creating the environmental product declaration. Without PCRs, creating or comparing environmental product declarations, without environmental product declarations, comparing life cycle assessment is kind of like comparing apples and oranges. You can have different scopes, you can have different boundaries to your LCA, different data requirements, and it's really because there are no instructions or guidelines set on how to actually complete the assessment. But with EPDs, comparing life cycle assessment is more like comparing apples to apples. This is because you have a set of instructions and guidelines that allow for comparable assessments of products in the same category. So in summary, EPDs are credible, they're objective, and they're communication tools that are based upon life cycle assessment. And they really facilitate decision making based upon environmental attributes. So how is this document created? First and foremost, one must work with something called an EPD program operator, and this is all laid out in the ISO 14025 guidelines. An EPD program operator guides the client through the entire process of creating the environmental product declaration and also ensures that ISO 14025 is being followed throughout the process. To create an EPD, first one must search and consider available product category rules. If there's not a product category rule available, one must either create a new PCR or modify an existing PCR. The next step is to conduct and verify a life cycle assessment. From there, the EPD is created. It is then verified and registered with the program operator. So you need at least 3 parties to create an EPD. First is an LCA practitioner, second is the LCA verifier, and third is the EPD verifier, or the program operator. And sometimes you need 4, depending on if there is a product category rule available or not. So as a program operator, UL focuses on the first part and the last part of this process. First, we help people search and consider available PCRs, create new product category rules, and then we also institute the third-party verification of the environmental product declaration and the registration of the EPD with UL Environment. So as I mentioned, this is the first step, search and consider available product category rules. Currently, there are about 350 to 400 PCRs available throughout the world. Some of those are focused on various regions. So if there is a PCR available in another region, then it can be used here in North America, but there has to be some modification and harmonization of that PCR. So as a program operator, one of the main responsibilities of that program operator is to ensure harmonization of these product category rules. If there isn't a PCR, that's when the fourth party is needed to be brought in. Again, under UL's model of being an EPD program operator, we also fulfill this need, but there also are third parties that will draft product category rules and then work with program operators to ensure that they're registered and reviewed per ISO 14025 guidelines. When developing a PCR, normally first one submits a PCR proposal. That PCR is then drafted through a normally smaller consortium of individuals or a program operator or a consulting firm. That PCR is then brought into something called open consultation. And this is a process of stakeholder engagement to ensure that comments are taken into consideration and that PCR really fits the needs of not only the industry but the stakeholders involved in using the EPD. The next step is to put that PCR through something called a panel review. Per ISO, there needs to be 3 people that sit on that panel, a minimum of 3. And that panel must be separate than those that were involved in the open consultation. Last but not least, that PCR is approved and published. And again, this is all, at least from open consultation on, managed by a program operator. I just talked through these ones pretty quickly. So once you have the product category rule, what happens next? That's when the LCA practitioner is brought in. And this LCA practitioner could be housed, in-house at a manufacturing firm, or it could be a consulting firm, depending on the choice of the manufacturer. They actually conduct a life cycle assessment using the established product category rules and help the client understand what their overall environmental impact are, or if it's an in-house LCA practitioner, again, help really understand where their impacts are throughout the product life cycle. So just a quick aside on LCA, I know we're running short on time here, so I'll talk quickly, but I did want to go over this for those of you who aren't as familiar with the topic. Life cycle assessment really looks at a product from raw material extraction through disposal, and this is dependent upon what boundaries are established in the product category rules. So it's a comprehensive system assessment that analyzes products, again, from raw material extraction through disposal or from something called cradle to gate. It allows for the presentations of trade-offs. So again, this is where the management tool comes into play, using LCA as a management tool. You can really understand what your impacts are across the life cycle and therefore understand how to make trade-off decisions to better reduce your environmental footprint. So you might have 2 options. Option 1 may provide you with less solid waste when you're modeling a product scenario. Option 2 may provide you with more solid waste. You look at this and you think, okay, well, if waste is important to my organization, I'm obviously going to go with option 1. However, you also might learn through this process that option 1 produces more chemical emissions during the manufacturing process than option 2. So depending on what your strategy is and depending on how you communicate sustainability to the marketplace, you can then make a decision on which environmental impact is the most important to you. And again, this is communicated across multiple environmental issues, from global warming, which takes into consideration carbon footprint, through acidification, eutrophication, and human health. If you're interested in learning more about these specific impact categories, we have a white paper that will take you through various definitions and really digs into the specifics of LCA. So I can send that to you if you'd like to learn more. So after the LCA is complete, there is an LCA verifier that is brought in to review the actual life cycle assessment. They ensure that that LCA was produced per the product category rules and that data quality is kosher, etc. They're really verifying that the data and the resulting information is credible. After the LCA is complete and verified, that's when the EPD creation begins. Some people choose to do this, kind of get a head start before the LCA is done, depending on timeline for projects. But really, you need that LCA information to complete the creation of the environmental product declaration. And that EPD, again, must be created in accordance with the relevant product category rule. After the EPD is completed, it's then submitted again for verification by another party. So the LCA verifier is independent from the EPD program operator, and the EPD program operator or EPD verifier verifies the actual final environmental product declaration. And again, this EPD is verified in accordance with the product category rule. So last but not least, after that entire process is complete, the environmental product declaration is registered with the program operator, and it can be used in the marketplace as an ISO 14025 compliant environmental product declaration. So I do want to touch on one other pretty important aspect of environmental product declarations. EPDs themselves are great tools. They are tools that allow you to communicate the life cycle impacts of your product. They are credible. They're based upon globally recognized international guidelines and standards. However, they do not tell you if a product is quote-unquote green. There are other tools in the proverbial specification toolkit that can do that. The EPD, when used in combination with those other tools, such as certifications or claim validations, really can paint a complete picture of a product's total environmental impact as well as the environmental preferability of that product. So, for example, when looking at a UL environment EPD, you can see that, and this is just a mock-up example, but you can see that the EPD itself contains life cycle impact information, the environmentally preferable product certification, or the SPC, denotes that a product is environmentally preferable, and then the environmental claim validation supplements the information in the EPD to back up third-party or second-party claims, such as recycled content. So that concludes the overall presentation portion of the PowerPoint. Does anybody have any questions?
Question one was, is there any guidance on how one would evaluate between two products where the EPDs show a mix of higher and lower impacts compared to each other? And if so, what data or guidance is there for a normalization of those two items?
So the data guidance is normally contained within the product category rule itself. So if there are normalization factors or weightings that are applied to the life cycle assessment, that would be included in the product category rule. Now, whoever asked this question brings up a very good point. And you know, there's definitely there's confusion on how to interpret the data within the EPD. And I think that that's just kind of a market reality of a new tool. We're working to educate the end user on how to actually use the documents and how to understand where comparability is applicable and where it's not. And I think as the science progresses, there will be a greater accuracy when looking at EPDs and comparing them side by side based upon the product category rules. Now, in terms of weighting, if you actually take the data within the EPD and apply that to an algorithm-based weighting system, we're not quite there yet. We really need to establish the baseline for data first and understand what the overall product category individual base or aggregate baseline is for various individual product categories. So once you have that baseline, then you can start to say, okay, I know that the general average carbon footprint for product category X is 26 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And once you have that, then you can really start to compare product against baseline and start to create algorithmic-based weightings that will really inform purchasing decisions.
We have a couple more questions filtering in here. I'm going to try to catch them up to you while I'm asking the ones that were already in the queue here for you as well. So there was the second question was, kind of on a more basic level, how or where do you even find PCRs? I don't know if there's a database or something along the lines where people can go to find them, or even just be able to help them out in figuring out where to start looking would be helpful as well.
Yeah, PCRs are pretty tricky to find. Unfortunately, there is not a central repository of these documents. We have done a lot of research and a lot of digging, and we have a central library that we keep. So if you're interested in learning if there's a PCR for your product category, at this point, I would say just reach out to me or anybody on the EPD team at UL. Those of you who know Paul Firth and Loretta Tam, they both also have access to this. So we can help you. It's not an easy task, and we have pretty much all that information on file, so we'd be happy to provide it.
Question 3, I'm hoping you got a chance to look at it there, so just so you're prepared here. Is the program operator allowed to commission or conduct the LCA as well, or is there a rule of separation of people so that there's cross-validation, things of that nature?
That's a great question, and one that we were asking for about a year, actually. So we actually took this up to the ISO Interpretation Board, and we're still waiting on clarification. But the 14025 guidelines are a little bit vague when determining if the program operator is allowed to actually conduct the LCA. At UL, we have interpreted it as a clear separation. We wanted to add a kind of an extra level of credibility to the program, and also we chose to build more of a platform as opposed to trying to house every single individual service in-house. So we actively work with external parties to conduct that LCA portion. We figured until there's a real strict, clear rule or guidance on what ISO interpretations are, we would rather be kind of safe than sorry. So yeah, unfortunately I don't have a black or white answer, but it's definitely a question that has come up in the past, and as we learn more, I'd be happy to share that.
Do you know by any chance, is there a repository or a logical place to look for PCRs related to paint and coatings?
Yeah, we would have that on file. I think there is a draft PCR for paint and coating, but let me check with the team, and if you can email me whoever answered that question, I can
Sure can.
reach out. Somebody asked me that a couple weeks ago. I think that there is, but I just want to double check. I don't want to give anybody false information. 2 more questions here. First one's coming from Paul, who is wondering, does any change that a manufacturer makes in a product manufacturing process invalidate a previously validated EPD? Or more shortly, I guess, does an EPD have a shelf life or an expiration date to it? Yes, it does. So there was recently released a guidance document for creating product category rules in the building industry by the European Commission on Standards. And that document dictates that EPDs have essentially a 5-year shelf life. And there's an attestation and maintenance clause within that document as well, that EPDs must be reviewed annually. And if there's a change within the life cycle assessment results or any other information within that EPD, within a certain variant, then that EPD must be updated. But there is a recertification requirement every 5 years, and again, this is dependent mainly upon the product category rules. So for product categories in different industries, it's sometimes 3. For the building industry, the average has been 5. I'm sure that will change over time. And then again, there's that annual attestation and maintenance clause that requires manufacturers to submit an annual review, essentially, of the information in the EPD. And if there's a variance in that, then yes, it has to be updated.
Next question here is, I guess, a little bit more about UL than specifically about EPDs in general. But there's just a question about whether or not there are other organizations that offer a similar or even a contrasting service to the UL. And how does the market share play out? I guess just a matter of figuring out, should they put all their eggs in one basket working with you all, or is there something they should be looking to, compare and see which one works best for their day-to-day business activities?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are multiple EPD program operators around the world. And depending on where your target market is and where your specific focus is, that's how you're kind of going to want to choose your program operator. So for example, there's a program in Germany called IBU, and they focus primarily on the German region. If you're selling product in Germany and you only want to sell product in Germany, they're a really great resource to go to. There are similar programs in Sweden, in France. There's an EPD program in Korea as well. And then here in North America, we have NSF, which is also a program operator. They have been developing product category rules to date. I don't think that they've published any environmental product declarations, but they're definitely developing PCRs. And they have a very similar kind of framework and structure to the UL program. I know that they're basing everything off of ISO 14025.
Question 7 we had coming in here was, is there a statistic or or research that indicates what products are more likely to be required or would more likely have an EPD? We already kind of addressed the second part of that question with what is the time frame for an EPD, and then lastly, what are the benefits of a completed LPD versus, say, maybe just a simple LCA documentation sheet?
So to answer the first question, statistics or research for what products are most likely to be required for EPDs. Looking, and this is just general knowledge off the top of my head, we haven't done quantitative market research, so caveat with that, but we're generally seeing with the introduction, like I said, of these green building rating systems, a push to have environmental product declarations on both structural materials and interiors. So the new LEED rating system covers both DGBN in Germany as well as the French system cover both. The Masdar City requests are also covering all products within the building. So at least in the building industry, we haven't seen that much differentiation between product types. Depending on which country you are selling into or you're providing products for, and what type of rating system you're trying to appease. And again, if you want to have a longer conversation about that, we can get into some of the geographical details. I'm happy to chat with whoever asked this question about that. The time frame for completing an environmental product declaration, it really depends on where you're at with starting the life cycle assessment process and if there is a PCR created for your category. If there's already a product category rule and you're starting your LCA from scratch, you could complete an EPD, I would say, in 3 to 4 months, given that your LCA process is efficient. If you have data collection issues or something like that, then it's definitely going to extend that timeline. Once we get a completed life cycle assessment and we work with a company to verify that, there's a fairly quick turnaround time there. And then last question, what are the benefits of an EPD compared with an LCA? So the EPD, as I mentioned before, is based upon the product category rule. And this PCR essentially gives you a recipe for creating a life cycle assessment. So if you have an EPD, then you know that you created or conducted the LCA against a set of guidelines that theoretically the entire industry is following. If that EPD is registered with a program operator who understands and follows the rules of ISO and therefore requires the use of the same product category rules for each product category. The life cycle assessment doesn't have that degree of, I guess, clarity and comparability for each life cycle assessment. So product A could have a completely different scope and boundary than product B, even though they're in the same product category. Both are good. I would say that the EPD just gives you another level of clarity, assurance, definitely an added level of comparability and credibility.
I was just wondering, is the industry moving in the direction that a certified EPD, say by UL, would carry more weight than a non-certified EPD provided by a manufacturer? You know, this is a general cutoff sheet of sorts.
Absolutely. So if you look at the LEED language, the LEED 2012 draft language, you actually have to have the EPD certified by a third party to meet the highest tier of credit contribution. And UL is definitely one of those third parties. That's similar to other requirements for various green building rating systems globally. Now, whether the certified EPD will carry, certified by UL will carry more weight than other program operators, we'll see what happens there.
Question here of what product families, or I guess do you even know of product families that are coming out with EPDs quickly, or I guess even easier, versus other ones that you've seen a trend of maybe it being more difficult or it may taking longer for the EPDs to be completed? I guess just more of a heads up to those people in the industry, looking, maybe there's certain areas that they should expect it to be a while before they see some good EPDs out there, or is it kind of an equal time zone, a time period for all different types of building products?
Yeah, I think this question really depends on the availability of product category rules. Certainly we have publicly available EPDs on the website that you can check out, and those are in the category of carpet tile and then insulated metal panels. But in terms of product category rules themselves, there are currently PCRs for flooring, and these are the ones that have kind of been modified for North American use and accepted. Flooring, ceiling tile, so there was an EPD published with a ceiling tile PCR. Furniture is being worked on now. I don't think it's quite yet finalized, but it's almost there from what I understand, and if somebody has a different information, feel free to pipe up there. Insulated metal panels, there's various PCRs being modified for steel, concrete, some of the more robust structural products as well. And then we are seeing a very increased interest in developing product category rules for pretty much the majority of interior products.
We have gotten 2 more questions popped in here. I've just sent the last one off to you to give you a heads up there, Heather. But I guess question here, I'm going to again put these out of order just to kind of go with what you're talking about. Do you feel there are currently enough EPDs out there for a building project that people could even feasibly get the LEED pilot credit? Or do you feel it's more USGBC is kind of getting ahead of the cart and making sure that if and when EPDs do start to become more mainstream, they're already ready for it to become an issue within buildings?
Yeah, I think that the USGBC is really doing a great job at encouraging the inclusion of tools that allow for understanding of product impacts throughout its life cycle on a more quantitative level. And by creating the pilot credits and by including the material optimization credit and the LEED 2012 rating system, they're really driving demand for those, I'm not going to say more sophisticated, but other types of procurement tools. To answer the question, do I feel that there are enough EPDs to apply for LEED pilot credit? Yes, absolutely. If you look at the nuances for completing the requirements for LEED pilot credit submission, you have to make a concerted attempt to meet the requirements of the pilot credit. So if you are doing that and if you're demonstrating that you're using products that have third-party certified EPDs, then yes, there will be a greater chance of meeting that pilot credit.
Just wondering, what does the UL do to assure the broadest possible industry input as it continues to gather and develop information for developing those PCRs? Is there a process or a set rules of how you do that people should know about or can possibly get involved with in helping the development of PCRs as it works with EPDs?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have developed and it was per industry feedback really, we've developed a pretty robust stakeholder engagement protocol to use when going through this PCR creation process. And we've definitely heard the criticism that there are not enough end users involved in the development of product category rules. And we've been actively trying to engage those end users at various architectural design firms and specification firms to help weigh in on what information will be the most useful for them when using these documents and what tools will be the most useful for them when using EPD-related information. Because, you know, at the end of the day, manufacturers can produce these all day long, but if they're not being used, then we're really not accomplishing the end goal of making smarter, more intelligent purchasing decisions that reduce environmental impact. So again, we've really increased the kind of robustness of our stakeholder engagement process, and we're definitely starting to include the end user in that process as well. If anybody does want to get involved in PCR development or be notified when we are starting to develop new product category rules, feel free to email me, and we have a kind of a database of interested parties that we keep on tap. So I'll definitely add your contact information to that database and reach out to you when we're ready.
Still not seeing any more hands raised or questions asked. I think, Heather, if there's anything else you'd like to wrap up with for today, we can probably get going a little bit early here and wait for everybody to join us again in May for our next call.
No, I think that's about it. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining. And like I said, if you think of additional questions or you have any other information that you need, just feel free to reach out to me. We do have a host of resources available, from white papers to example environmental product declarations. And like I said, we're really starting to work with the stakeholder community in a more robust way. So if you're interested in either learning more about how to use these documents, we can assist you there, and potentially come and deliver some CE courses as well.
Thank you again, and have a great rest of the week.